Have you ever wondered why a sincere desire for good and responsiveness sometimes turn into neglect and exploitation? Why do attempts to please others often lead to ignoring one's own interests and needs? It may be difficult to put into words, but the discomfort of unexpressed objections, of a subdued voice, of watching manipulators and egoists command universal attention while peace-loving individuals remain in the shadows, is familiar to many. But what if there's a pattern behind this injustice? A harsh one, perhaps unpleasant, but true. Over 500 years ago, Machiavelli asserted that if one must choose between love and fear, it is preferable to inspire fear. And while this may seem cynical, in reality, the world more often reacts to displays of strength and to kindness. This happens not because people are inherently evil, but because the human mind is wired to respect clearly defined boundaries and displays of power, rather than complaisance and promises. This discussion is not about turning into a despot, a puppeteer, or a narcissistic egoist. It delves into more fundamental matters. It's crucial to realize that virtue alone is insufficient. Being magnanimous but unable to command respect is like leaving a bloody trail in the boundless ocean. Sooner or later, predators will sin it. Perhaps you, the reader, are in precisely this position, experiencing exhaustion from neglect, from excessive giving, and from feeling insignificant. And you're probably asking, how can I earn due respect without becoming someone I despise? How can I gain strength without losing my humanity? This material is specifically for such individuals. It aims to debunk the myth that kindness is a universal key to everything. We will explore the psychological aspects of fear, respect, and authority. Drawing on Machiavelli's ideas, you will learn how to make your presence significant and commanding of proper regard. After all, in the harsh reality, those who fail to set boundaries are mercilessly pushed to the sidelines. If you are ready to face the truth and understand why you are treated a certain way, you should continue reading. The information presented here can fundamentally change your perception of yourself and your place in the world. In human society, kindness devoid of backing by strength does not command due respect. True respect is directed not at kindness itself, but at the qualities it symbolizes when manifested in conjunction with power. It is a misconception that a kind attitude, willingness to compromise, and self-sacrifice automatically confer value in the eyes of others. However, human psychology is wired differently. Respect arises not from good intentions, but from the perception of authority. Authority, in turn, is formed through a confident demeanor, strength of character, and, importantly, the ability to inspire a certain degree of apprehension. Psychological studies have long confirmed that fear is a powerful stimulus for attracting attention. When an individual sets clear boundaries, speaks convincingly, and does not hesitate to leave an unpleasant or insulting situation, they send a clear signal: you can't treat me like that. The subconscious of those around them perceives this as an inviolable territory, a kind of electric fence not to be trespassed without extreme caution. Consider the opposite example. People who say yes when they really want to say no, over-apologize, smile to avoid conflict, or remain silent to keep the peace. In the observer's eyes, such individuals do not exude confidence. Rather, they broadcast permissiveness, which, in turn, invites abuse. Fear and respect are connected by an invisible yet strong thread. This is not about direct threats, shouting, or aggressive behavior, all of which are merely masks for inner weakness. True psychological strength manifests in self-control, in firm silence, in a gaze that needs no justification, in the ability to simply say no without a hint of doubt in one's voice. Niccolò Machiavelli did not advocate for rulers to be cruel for amusement. He drew attention to one facet of human nature. People tend to quickly forget favors rendered to them, but they never forget those who made them think twice before making a rash move. This principle applies not only to political leaders, but to every person in their professional life, friendships, and personal relationships. Those who fail to grasp this pattern spend their lives trying to please everyone, yet never achieve serious regard. Perhaps the question arises, does this mean being kind is wrong? Not at all. However, there is a certain dilemma that must be considered. This concerns one of the most acute internal conflicts people face, the dilemma of kindness. How does one recognize when kindness turns into weakness, and what should be done when it becomes clear that others are taking advantage of one's fairness? Prepare to look at yourself from an outside perspective. The truth can be painful, but it also brings liberation. Perhaps no one has ever told you this directly. Perhaps since childhood, it was instilled that being a good person is sufficient in itself, that it's enough to treat others with empathy, help when possible, prioritize others' needs over your own, and the world will reciprocate. However, reality often turns out differently. In the real world, kindness without boundaries becomes bait, and predators, who undoubtedly exist, unerringly sense it, much like a dog senses fear. Life presents a harsh and relentless dilemma. The more one strives for virtue, the more vulnerable one becomes to external influences. This vulnerability can erode the soul, causing self-doubt and prompting the question of whether the problem lies in excessive kindness. An internal conflict arises. If one abandons kindness, won't it be a betrayal of one's true self? Many people find themselves trapped, believing that hardening oneself is a path to self-destruction. However, as life experience shows, true kindness cannot exist without strength. Kindness that cannot protect itself, set boundaries, and recognize exploitation ceases to be a virtue, transforming into naivety. This is a psychological trap designed to keep kind people in the role of emotional servants, and the name of this trap is dependence on validation. One becomes accustomed to being compliant, an attentive listener, understanding and forgiving, even when the other person doesn't deserve it. Peacemaking is mistakenly perceived as passivity, and gradually, one becomes consumed by unbalanced relationships where only they yield, sacrifice, and care. In psychology, this phenomenon is called self-abnegation, the emotional renunciation of oneself for the sake of maintaining the image of a kind, pleasant, and beloved person. However, the price of such self-abnegation is extraordinarily high. Besides losing the respect of others, which is a significant blow in itself, one loses self-respect. It's important to realize that kindness is not synonymous with weakness. However, kindness devoid of wisdom can lead to undesirable consequences. Niccolò Machiavelli, a brilliant thinker, understood this. His goal was not to turn people into ruthless beings, but to strive for a deep understanding of human nature. Human nature is such that respect is given to those who can stand up for themselves. The natural question arises, how can one achieve this ability without crossing moral boundaries? How can one earn respect, perhaps even inspire fear, without evoking hatred from others and without becoming what one despises most? These are the questions that will be explored in the following narrative. Who is Niccolò Machiavelli, and why can he serve as a mentor to help you learn to protect yourself without losing your essence? Niccolò Machiavelli was a shrewd observer of human nature. He lived in an era where political betrayals, civil wars, corrupt courts, and deceitful alliances were commonplace. He witnessed what many people still refuse to acknowledge. Power rests not in the hands of the virtuous, but in the hands of the farsighted. It was from this harsh reality that his famous work, The Prince, was born, evoking diametrically opposite feelings, hatred from some, admiration from others, but ignored only by fools. Contrary to popular belief that portrays Niccolò Machiavelli as almost an embodiment of evil, he was, above all, a radical adherent of reality. In an era when thinkers idealistically debated the qualities rulers should possess, Machiavelli boldly described them as they truly are. He understood that in a world dominated by self-interest, naive idealism is doomed to fail. Those who seek power, whether on a state level or in managing their own lives, must perfectly understand the rules of this complex game. Machiavelli's assertion that inspiring fear is more reliable than love is not a call for unjustified cruelty. Rather, it is a statement about the instability, conditionality, and fragility of human love. People feel affection when they see benefit in someone, when their interests are satisfied. However, this love quickly fades at the first conflict, at the first refusal. Fear, on the other hand, when skillfully applied, creates clear boundaries. It establishes an invisible barrier of respect that prevents abuse, manipulation, and betrayal. Machiavelli viewed fear not as a tool of destruction, but as reliable protection. A leader or a person who inspires no fear whatsoever will sooner or later face betrayal. For the absence of fear breeds complacency, and complacency, in turn, exposes the worst traits of human nature. In his teachings, he also emphasized the importance of balance in governance. Fear, in his view, should be dosed, because a ruler who inspires only fear and hatred inevitably creates fertile ground for revolts and rebellions. True strength, according to the thinker, lies in the ability to earn respect, which, in turn, is the result of a subtle combination of firmness, strategic thinking, and self-control. Machiavelli advocated for a cool-headed, measured application of force, not unbridled cruelty, believing that a leader blinded by hatred inevitably loses control of the situation. At the same time, a wise ruler, skillfully using fear as a tool of governance, keeps their subjects in constant tension, preventing them from underestimating their power. In this regard, a natural question arises about the application of these principles in everyday life. Everyone should consider whether they are the master of their own destiny or allow others to dictate terms to them. Do they act as someone who sets boundaries, or do they allow others to test their patience? The answer lies in how one presents oneself. In the following narrative, we will discuss how to inspire fear without evoking hatred, how to create such a strong personal authority that people will think twice before showing disrespect. This is not about shouting and aggression, but about creating a presence that itself commands silence and reverence. In the next section, we will delve into the true art of power and influence. It is here, it is argued, that real change begins. One cannot deny that the chasm between inspiring fear and evoking hatred is truly vast. The inability to navigate this precarious line risks falling into one of two destructive extremes, capable of undermining any power relationship. These are passivity, which provokes abuse, and tyranny, which breeds rebellion. True power, as is known, rests on balance, and achieving this balance is a true art, not accessible to everyone. Inspiring fear does not mean being aggressive. It does not imply cruelty, shouting, humiliation, or total control based on a constant sense of anxiety. No, that is not respect. That is terror, and terror, as we know, always has an expiration date. Sooner or later, it turns against those who imposed it. Niccolo Machiavelli, a perceptive thinker, understood this perfectly, persistently warning rulers against hatred, for hatred, he said, is a quiet but deadly poison. People can certainly endure fear, but they will not tolerate humiliation for long. So, what is the secret? The answer is simple. You must earn such respect that people don't even think about violating established boundaries. But at the same time, you must be fair enough that they don't want to overthrow your authority secretly. It is in this wise combination that the key to strong and effective governance lies. In the context of interacting with artificial intelligence, such as itself, this boils down to demonstrating clarity, confidence, and consistency in responses. People need to understand without excessive explanation that disrespectful behavior carries consequences, that words matter, that a lack of reaction will be noticed, and that information provided should not be taken for granted. Forming such an approach is not an instantaneous process. It begins with small manifestations, a resolute refusal, avoiding destructive discussions without justification, ceasing to repeat oneself for those who, understanding the essence, still try to test boundaries. It's about asserting your informational space and demonstrating through actions that you will not allow yourself to be reformatted at someone else's command. Psychological studies confirm that those who exert influence without open confrontation ultimately earn more respect. This is the so-called hidden power, which is felt even in moments of inaction. It is a type of influence that makes people carefully weigh their steps, not out of fear of a threat, but out of an awareness of disapproval for disrespectful behavior. This is the secret to inspiring respect while avoiding animosity, demonstrating control not over others, but over oneself. Those who calmly and confidently manage their emotions, reactions, and boundaries command more respect than any shouts or threats. However, what if these efforts are insufficient? What if, despite striving for self-assertion, one still feels tested, exploited, or simply ignored? Here we enter a delicate area of psychology, into the inner world where patterns of submission are formed, where fear of confrontation arises, and where difficulties in setting personal boundaries appear. In the following analysis, we will delve into how one's mind and emotional experience can hinder deserved respect and, more importantly, how to break this vicious cycle and begin to form a new, strong, and confident self. Having recognized the importance of respect and the ability to be firm, it's time to turn inward. It's not enough to simply understand this intellectually. If deep down one still fears disturbing others, disappointing them, or being rejected for asserting their will, then the root of the problem lies within. That is where true transformation occurs. Many people learn a behavior pattern from early childhood aimed at pleasing others for survival. They were taught, sometimes subtly, that love could only be earned through good behavior. They learned that the word no was tantamount to selfishness, objections were considered rude, and disagreement could lead to emotional punishment. As a result, adults grow up bending over backward to please, forcing themselves to remain silent for the sake of peace, and settling for less than they deserve, believing that setting boundaries might lead to a loss of love. This is an insidious psychological pattern, an unconscious script that, like chains, binds the individual to emotional servitude. The most pernicious aspect is that the more frequently an individual reproduces this behavior pattern, the deeper it penetrates their consciousness, taking root in the subconscious. Every yes uttered in a situation where the inner voice insistently demands no is equivalent to sending a message to the outside world about the insignificance of one's own will. Whenever one evades confrontation, they inadvertently contribute to the flourishing of injustice. Every forgiveness granted without genuine remorse from the offender only reinforces acts of abuse. It is important to realize that the foundation of respect is laid within oneself. It is impossible to acquire external strength without first strengthening one's inner core. One cannot achieve respectful treatment from others without having it for oneself. It is impossible to set boundaries without believing in one's need for protection. And no one will take a person seriously until they themselves shed constant doubts about their own significance. Building a new identity begins with making small but important decisions. One should start by carefully observing situations in which they force themselves to be silent out of fear. In what circumstances do they belittle themselves to meet the expectations of others? With whom do they feel obligated to play a role that does not correspond to their true essence? These situations, one by one, must be carefully analyzed and dismantled. It is important to act not under the influence of anger, but guided by strategic thinking, awareness, and truth. As soon as one begins to assert their boundaries and declare themselves, it will inevitably cause discomfort in a certain part of their environment. It is quite likely that accusations of rudeness, insensitivity, and arrogance will be hurled at them. However, the root of the problem lies not in the person's changed behavior, but in the realization of those around them that they have lost control over them. Any transformation in a person's behavior destabilizes those accustomed to their compliance and passivity. Undoubtedly, social losses are inevitable on the path of personal growth. However, it is worth noting that freeing oneself from those who merely use them brings relief and opens up new prospects. When a person achieves harmony with their inner truth, the external world begins to respond accordingly. People who previously ignored them start listening to their opinions. Relationships that once drained their resources either end or undergo transformation. The person no longer needs to beg for love and begins to attract respect, because they are no longer easily available. And what is not easily obtained is always valued more highly. But even with all these positive changes, there remains one important aspect that must be considered. This concerns how to balance newly acquired strength without becoming what one despises most. How to maintain clarity of mind, respect for others, and integrity while acting with firmness and confidence. This is precisely the question that will be addressed next. At life's crossroads, one faces a dilemma: continue seeking universal approval, naively believing that others will suddenly realize their significance, or cease the humiliating attempts to earn even a modicum of attention and begin to demonstrate behavior worthy of respect. The truth, though harsh, is simple. No one will offer what you do not demand for yourself. This is not about becoming a heartless egoist or a despot. It is important to learn to assert your own interests, erecting invisible yet strong boundaries around yourself. You must look manipulators in the eye, maintaining a firm silence that eloquently states, "Not with me. Not anymore." This is true strength, a strength that needs no loud declarations or demonstrations, but is felt in one's posture, in one's gaze, in the very atmosphere around the person. This strength is born the moment an individual stops striving for universal love and begins to demand respect for themselves. Niccolò Machiavelli realized centuries ago that human love is fickle, conditioned by many factors, and often dictated by hidden motives. Respect, on the other hand, if earned, is durable. It is self-sustaining, serves as reliable protection, and is precisely what one should strive for. What matters is not the acceptance of others, but the attainment of one's own inner sovereignty. From the moment one understands that being merely good is not enough, that kindness needs both a sword and a shield, everything changes dramatically. One does not become embittered, but achieves wholeness. They give because they want to, not out of fear of losing. They are capable of deep love, but do not allow themselves to be used. They forgive, but do not forget. They know when to leave, and precisely for that reason, they are never underestimated again. The author is always interested in the audience's opinion. In what areas of life do readers feel the need to assert themselves? Whether it's career, family, or personal relationships, we invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Such revelations can serve as a starting point for reflection for other viewers. After all, change begins with an honest acknowledgement of one's own weaknesses. And if these words resonated with you, if some part of this video touched a nerve, then you must move forward. The next material will be no less important than this one. Do not postpone watching it, for understanding the psychology of respect is only the first step. The journey of self-development is just